The first thing you need to know is this: my boss wasn't just demanding, he thrived on making people miserable. If you enjoy workplace drama stories, hit subscribe because this one will make you question what some people do for power. His name was Mr. Dalton. He ran our department like a king ruling over terrified servants. Nobody dared challenge him. He'd take credit for successes, blame others for failures, and never missed a chance to remind us that our jobs depended on his good mood. I had been working at the company for 3 years, long enough to see how he crushed new hires until they quit. My co-workers whispered about looking for other jobs, but most of us stayed because the pay was steady and the job market wasn't great. 2 people mattered most in this story besides me: Anna, a smart analyst who quietly resisted Dalton's games, and Jake, my teammate who tried to stay invisible to avoid becoming a target. Together, we formed a silent alliance, watching Dalton closely. What I didn't know yet was that he had already chosen me as his next victim, and the way he would come after me was something none of us saw coming. It started on a Monday morning meeting. Mr. Dalton walked in with his usual smirk, sipping coffee like he owned the entire building. To everyone's surprise, he called my name. "Great work on the quarterly numbers," he said in front of the whole team. "You really pulled it together." The room froze. Dalton never gave compliments, especially not in public. Anna shot me a cautious glance, and Jake raised his eyebrows. At first, I felt proud. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally noticing my hard work. But Dalton wasn't the kind of man to hand out praise without a hidden agenda. By the afternoon, his tone changed. He called me into his office, shut the door, and leaned back in his chair. "If you're as good as everyone thinks," he said slowly, "then you can handle the new project. It's high stakes, short timeline, and failure isn't an option. You'll make me proud. Or you'll regret it." He slid a thick folder across the desk. The deadline? 10 days. The project? A data reconciliation that normally took at least a month with 3 people working full-time. I walked out of his office with the folder in my hands, my stomach sinking. Dalton's compliment wasn't praise, it was the first move in a much bigger game he was about to play. And the worst part? I had no idea just how rigged the game already was. By Tuesday morning, the weight of Dalton's assignment hit me like a ton of bricks. 10 days to finish a month's worth of work wasn't just ambitious, it was sabotage in disguise. I knew it, Anna knew it, and even Jake whispered to me, "He's setting you up." The project folder contained hundreds of mismatched financial entries. My job was to reconcile every transaction against multiple systems, many of which hadn't been updated properly in years. It was a nightmare task, one that would take long nights, endless coffee, and a miracle to complete. Dalton, of course, didn't make things easier. He began sending daily progress check emails, each one dripping with sarcasm. "Hope you're not drowning yet," one read. Another, "Remember, accuracy is everything, I wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself." I stayed late in the office, sometimes past midnight, scrolling through spreadsheets until my eyes blurred. Anna would occasionally stop by, dropping off snacks and reminding me to breathe. Jake tried to help in secret, but Dalton made it clear this was my responsibility alone. The more I worked, the more it felt like Dalton was waiting for me to fail. And just when I thought I was making progress, I discovered something in the data that made my heart stop. On the 4th night of grinding through the files, I noticed something odd. Buried in the spreadsheets were transactions that didn't match any records in our system. At first, I thought it was just sloppy bookkeeping, but then I saw the amounts, round figures, always just under $5,000, spread across several months. It wasn't just messy data. It looked deliberate. The strangest part? All those transactions had Dalton's approval signature in the digital logs. My stomach tightened. If this was what I thought it was, Dalton wasn't just setting me up to fail, he might be hiding something much bigger. I printed a few of the questionable entries and tucked them into my bag. The next morning, when I casually mentioned inconsistencies to Dalton, he cut me off immediately. "Stick to your assignment. Don't overthink." His tone was sharp, final, like a warning. Anna, when I showed her a printout at lunch, leaned in and whispered, "Be careful. If he's covering something up, he won't let you get in his way." Jake looked terrified just hearing about it and begged me not to dig deeper. But I couldn't ignore what I had found. Dalton had chosen me to fail, but maybe he had made a slip that could bring him down instead. And that's when the rumors around the office started to spread. By the end of the week, the office had changed. Whispers followed me everywhere I went. I'd walk past the break room and hear voices drop to a hush, only for people to glance at me nervously. Something was spreading, and it wasn't just about my impossible deadline. Anna pulled me aside near the elevators. "People are saying Dalton's been funneling projects to his friends' companies. If what you found ties into that, he'll do anything to bury it." The idea made my chest tighten. Dalton was already feared. If employees believed he was dirty, that could explain why nobody ever dared speak up. He held not just our jobs, but possibly secrets that could ruin careers. Jake looked pale when he caught me in the hall. "Stop digging. Seriously. Dalton eats people alive when they cross him." But it was too late. Dalton must have sensed the shift in the air, because he started hovering over me more than usual. He'd show up unannounced at my desk, asking pointed questions, watching me type as if daring me to slip. Every move I made, I felt his eyes on me. And deep down, I knew he was planning something far worse than just setting me up for failure. Do you think coworkers should speak up against a boss like Dalton, or stay silent to survive? The following Monday, Dalton summoned me into his office with that familiar smug grin. On his desk sat a fresh stack of papers, neatly clipped and waiting. "I reviewed some of your progress," he said, tapping the folder. "And it looks like there are inconsistencies. Numbers that don't add up." My heart skipped. I had been meticulous, double-checking everything. When I glanced through the folder, I realized what he'd done. He'd slipped in altered spreadsheets, ones that looked like my work but were riddled with errors. To anyone outside the process, it would seem like I had botched critical financial reports. "Careless work like this could damage the entire department's reputation," Dalton added smoothly, his voice laced with false concern. "Luckily, I caught it before the executives did. You need to clean this up immediately, or maybe this job isn't the right fit for you." I walked out of his office shaken. He wasn't just pressuring me anymore, he was planting evidence to frame me. Anna later whispered, "He's building a case against you. He'll hand it to HR and make it look airtight." Jake didn't even want to hear about it, he just muttered, "You're finished if you fight him." But as I stared at those doctored files, a thought formed in the back of my mind. If Dalton was willing to forge mistakes, maybe he wasn't as untouchable as everyone believed. And that's when the project's real twist revealed itself. Late that night, I stayed in the office long after everyone had gone home. I needed to clear my head, so I decided to retrace Dalton's steps through the system. If he had planted fake spreadsheets, there had to be a digital trail somewhere. After hours of digging, I found it. Audit logs showed that Dalton's account had accessed my project folder at 2 in the morning, on 3 separate nights. The edits were timestamped, all linked directly to his login. He hadn't just slipped up, he'd left his fingerprints all over the sabotage. As I stared at the screen, another detail made my jaw drop. Dalton wasn't only tampering with my files. He had also altered older reconciliations, reports that had already been submitted to upper management. And those round number transactions I'd flagged? They lined up perfectly with his late-night edits. This wasn't just about me failing a deadline. Dalton had been covering up a pattern of shady financial activity, using my project as the perfect smokescreen. If I failed, nobody would question his actions. The realization made my pulse race. I wasn't just fighting for my job, I was holding evidence that could potentially bring down the most feared boss in the building. But I couldn't keep this to myself forever. I needed allies, and I had to choose carefully who I could trust. The next morning, I printed out the audit logs and slipped them into a plain folder. My hands shook as I carried it into the office. Every step felt heavier, like the walls themselves were warning me not to go through with it. I showed Anna first. She flipped through the pages, her eyes widening with every timestamp. This is enough to get him fired," she whispered. "Maybe even investigated." Jake, when I cautiously brought him in, wanted nothing to do with it. He shoved the folder back at me. "Don't drag me into this. If Dalton finds out I even looked at this, I'm gone." That afternoon, something strange happened. Dalton held a department-wide meeting. With a fake smile plastered across his face, he praised my hard work again, loudly calling me an example of dedication. But I noticed his hand resting casually on the very folder of falsified spreadsheets he had planted. He was preparing to use it at just the right moment, to destroy me in front of everyone. I sat there in silence, the real evidence hidden in my bag. Dalton thought he was playing chess, but he didn't know I had already seen the board. If you were in my position, would you go straight to human resources with the proof, or wait for Dalton to make his move? I knew charging straight into human resources could backfire. Dalton had friends everywhere, and if word got back to him, he'd twist the story before I had a chance to explain. I needed a strategy that would catch him off guard. That night, I scanned all the audit logs, saved backups to an external drive, and even emailed copies to myself at a private address. I wasn't going to risk losing the files mysteriously. Then, I started documenting everything: dates, conversations, even the sarcastic emails Dalton had sent me. Piece by piece, I built a timeline that showed the full picture. Anna agreed to help. "If you go down, I'll back you up," she promised, though I could see the fear in her eyes. Jake, meanwhile, avoided me completely, his silence proof that the pressure was getting to him. The hardest part was pretending nothing was wrong. Every morning, I'd nod at Dalton, answer his questions politely, and act like I was struggling with the workload. Inside, though, I was waiting for the right moment to turn the tables. And that moment came faster than I expected, when Dalton announced he'd be reviewing my progress with the executives at the end of the week. I realized then, I wouldn't have to chase him. He was walking straight into the trap I was building. Friday arrived, and Dalton was in rare form, smiling like a predator about to make his move. He called me into the conference room with two executives from corporate finance. "Let's go over your project," he said, with that chillingly calm tone. I opened my laptop, pretending to review spreadsheets nervously. Dalton leaned over, pointing at the errors he had planted. "See here? Mistakes. Careless work. This isn't what I expect from my team." His eyes glinted with satisfaction. Then I did something I hadn't planned until the last second. I calmly opened my folder, showing the audit logs and timestamps. "Actually," I said, "these edits weren't made by me. The system logs show they were made by your account, Mr. Dalton." The room went silent. Dalton's grin faltered, then snapped into defensive anger. He tried to spin a story, blaming technical errors and rogue IT scripts, but the executives weren't buying it. Anna, who had been quietly seated, presented her notes on the financial anomalies Dalton had attempted to hide. Dalton's usual control crumbled. He sputtered, tried to interrupt, but every piece of evidence I and Anna had gathered lined up perfectly. His attempt to frame me had backfired spectacularly. As the executives exchanged glances, I realized one thing clearly: Dalton had underestimated how far someone could go to defend themselves. By mid-afternoon, the office atmosphere had shifted completely. Dalton's usual aura of intimidation had evaporated, replaced by tense whispers and sidelong glances. His office, once a fortress of authority, felt empty and vulnerable. HR had already been notified behind the scenes, quietly reviewing my documentation and the audit logs. The executives were asking questions I had never imagined they would, questions about other projects, approvals, and past reconciliations. Dalton, who once controlled every conversation, could barely respond without contradicting himself. Anna and I watched from across the room as Dalton's carefully constructed persona cracked. His allies in the department avoided eye contact. Even Jake, who had stayed silent for weeks, allowed a small smirk to escape, clearly relieved to see Dalton finally exposed. I couldn't help but feel a mix of vindication and disbelief. After months of stress, manipulation, and near constant fear, Dalton was no longer untouchable. Every sarcastic comment, every late-night check-in, every planted spreadsheet had been used against him in a way he didn't anticipate. It wasn't over yet. Dalton still had to face official consequences, but the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. And just when I thought the worst of it was behind me, one last shocking revelation about Dalton came to light that nobody expected. By Monday morning, HR had officially stepped in. I was called to a private meeting with two representatives, laptops open and notes ready. They reviewed every document, every email, every timestamp I had collected. Dalton's name came up repeatedly, each instance a clear breach of company policy. I felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. This wasn't just about my project anymore, it was about holding someone accountable who had terrorized an entire team for months. HR asked pointed questions about whether anyone else had witnessed irregularities, and I provided names discreetly. Anna quietly confirmed what she had seen. Word spread quickly. Dalton tried to explain himself in hushed tones, claiming misunderstandings and technical errors, but HR wasn't buying it. They were professional, thorough, and focused on facts, not the fear tactics Dalton relied on daily. For the first time, I realized the power structure in our department had shifted entirely. Dalton's threats no longer intimidated anyone, the truth spoke louder than his smirk or sarcastic comments. Even Jake, who had avoided confrontation, started nodding in acknowledgement as he walked by. Dalton, usually untouchable, now faced scrutiny from all sides. But just as I thought the story was nearing its close, one last twist threatened to change everything. and it came from the least expected source. The following week felt surreal. Dalton was still in the office, but his confidence was gone. Employees who had tiptoed around him for years now spoke freely, and the tense atmosphere began to lift. Meetings felt normal for the first time in months. Anna and I quietly resumed our work, carefully keeping our distance from Dalton, who had become increasingly withdrawn. His usual smirk was replaced by a forced neutrality, and he avoided eye contact with anyone who might remind him of the evidence against him. Jake, who had stayed silent throughout, finally shared a small grin with me in the break room. It was as if we were all collectively realizing that Dalton's reign of fear had ended. Office morale was slowly rebounding, and employees began to regain a sense of control over their daily tasks. Management made subtle changes, project oversight was tightened, and Dalton was removed from key decision-making roles while investigations continued. His influence, once absolute, had been curtailed almost overnight. Despite everything, I kept a low profile, documenting minor developments without fanfare. I didn't need recognition, I only wanted the truth to stand. But even as things started to feel stable, I sensed that Dalton's arrogance had left behind one last ripple, an unexpected move that could either finalize his downfall or create one final complication. 2 weeks later, the final pieces fell into place. Corporate auditors discovered financial irregularities beyond the project I had been assigned. Dalton's attempts to manipulate records, cover mistakes, and frame me were only the tip of the iceberg. HR formally removed him from his managerial role pending a full investigation. Emails leaked internally showed him boasting about controlling the team, and executives weren't impressed. His reputation, once untouchable, crumbled in days. Co-workers whispered with a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. People who had silently endured his games finally felt vindicated. Anna smiled quietly, saying, "It's about time the office stopped fearing him." Even Jake admitted that he had underestimated how far I'd go to protect myself and expose the truth. Dalton's arrogance had been his undoing. Every sarcastic comment, every attempt to plant evidence, every late-night manipulation, each act came back to haunt him. The very skills he used to dominate the office were the same skills that exposed him. For me, it was a powerful lesson. Meticulous documentation, patience, and a clear plan could turn a seemingly unbeatable adversary into someone accountable. And as Dalton shuffled into his now empty office with his box of belongings, I realized one last truth: people who abuse power rarely escape unscathed. With Dalton gone from management, the office finally felt normal again. Meetings were calm, deadlines were reasonable, and people actually smiled at each other without fear of being micromanaged or blamed unfairly. Anna and I quietly resumed our work, but this time with a sense of security we hadn't felt in months. Looking back, I realized the key to surviving Dalton wasn't confrontation at first, it was observation, documentation, and patience. Knowing when to act, and having trustworthy allies, made all the difference. Jake even admitted that staying silent until the evidence was undeniable was probably the smartest choice he had made. Dalton's downfall was a reminder of one simple truth: abuse of power eventually catches up to you. Those who thrive on fear and manipulation rarely see the consequences coming. Meanwhile, people who protect themselves thoughtfully and strategically can turn even the worst situation around. The office learned a lesson too: no one is untouchable, and integrity matters more than fear. If you've ever dealt with a boss like Dalton, share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you handled it.